I'm Leslie Elliott Boyce, and this is The Radical Center, a recording project I began in 2022 as a way to describe and discuss the social and ideological currents that are rapidly altering our culture. In a time when political polarization seems to be the norm, I'm seeking to understand rather than react. I'm grateful to all the thoughtful men and women who share their stories and insights with me in this conversation series. If you would like to contribute to this project financially, there are links in the description. Thank you, and thank you all for listening and being part of this exploration. Well, today I'm speaking with Dr. Erik Lidström. And Erik, you are the author of this book that I'm holding right here, Education Unchained. It's going to be a little blurry, but I will provide any links that you can provide to me in the description of this video so that if people would like to read this, they can get a copy. I think it's a phenomenal book. I've been reading it. I really enjoy the way you've laid out your ideas, and I'm excited to talk with you about it and kind of get into the thesis of the book and some of your thoughts on what's going on in education, what can be improved, and it's just such a big topic. I'm not sure where to dive in. So perhaps would you start by just giving a little bit of your background and how you got interested in this topic?
Well, I'm Swedish, obviously, and I always had this idea that we should return to the old school system. We had an excellent school system in Sweden until 1968, which was, as I write in the book, the 19th century school system, very similar to the French school system at the time, where there were different. It was an elite track of so-called the School of Learning, and then in the 19th century there was they started a people's school, Folkskolan, which, contrary to what people believed, did not improve literacy because people had been fully literate in Sweden for a century at least. When Folkskolan was introduced. But I thought since 1968, when this old system was abolished, things have gone downhill and continue to go downhill. And people used to say in the 70s, the old school was better. And now they say, oh, in the 1980s, the school was much better when it worked. And so people have lost perspective. So I thought, why not return to the old system? And then, whilst working on a different book, which I have recently published, it dawned upon me that I was wrong, completely wrong. The question we should ask ourselves is, we had in the States, in Britain, in France, in Sweden, we had much better schools, and we had much less expensive schools as well. So where did they come from? That's the question we really should ask. And then if you look into it, you see that there were government schools, but didn't affect that many people. But there was a lot of other private education. And there is a tradition in Europe that goes back 2,500 years to the ancient Greeks Romans of private education. And this has waned and come back and so on. Very little is known about it because it was so obvious that people learned predominantly from their mothers and their fathers and retired soldiers in Sweden and so on and so forth that provided education. But it was obvious that people could read and write. And in this environment, there were private schools, competing private schools, where teachers from all walks of life, anyone from 15 to 95 can start a school. You have something to teach, and if you can interest paying customers, you start a school. And that's all there is to it. And what happened then in the 19th century is that for various reasons, governments decided we should take over this system. So they took over the 19th century school system. And in Sweden and in France and Germany, they you got the dual track system. You got the old cathedral schools, which was the elite track, and then you got people schools, and these merged, and then we got a magnificent 19th century school system, which in Sweden was finalized in 1864 and 1878, but then they didn't touch it until 1968. And then it turns out, as I demonstrate in the book, that every time you then try to reform this system, this old system was based on trial and error. So thousands upon thousands of schools and teachers competed to provide the best education for their students. That was nationalized, and then when you try to reform it, you've lost all contact with what is actually generating knowledge about education, which is the market. So you got these professional busybodies, Dewey in the United States, and you had ideas from Rousseau, and you had other reformers who dream up the perfect school system, and they populate the teaching seminars and teach and train teachers, and eventually you got school reform. And every time you apply school reform, things get worse. And so you had in the States, luckily we didn't have it in Sweden, you had the whole word method, which is an absolute disaster. And you are too young for that, I think. We had a new math in the United States in the 60s. You had a new math, and we got it in the 70s, and it destroyed math education. And as you go along, you get different kinds of people as well in the school system. You get the old system was very hard and unforgiving, but gradually you get people who want to be nice and then and want to work with children. There's nothing wrong with wanting to work with children, but if you have your focus on working with children, the problem is that then you are motivated with something called folk psychology. You like the human interactions. The problem with education is that all we need schools for are to teach those things that do not come naturally to us, like maths and history and grammar and stuff like that, which they have a practice makes perfect kind of character to them, which means that the reward must come from achieving something. It's not fun for most people to do maths. It should be the satisfaction of managing, achieving something that should be the reward. So it's delayed gratification. But that's not what a teacher who is steeped in folk psychology wants to do. And then lately in the States, you have a second wave of Marxism, because you had the first wave of Marxism in the 60s. But now you have James Lindsay has talked about it, of a sort of Maoism that has taken over the teaching colleges, where that's just falling from, used to be up here, you were down there, and now you're falling from, say, 30. Did provide 25-30% of what it could provide. Now it's gone down to 20, maybe, the school system of the United States. That's
That's a good start, I think. You have got when you talk about the trial and error, and that was really interesting to me. Talking about competition and the necessity
yeah,
of competition. Uh, there were several things in here that just really stood out to me, some of them early on. The point is that government must disengage from most aspects of schools and education if we are to improve them. And that speaks to
yeah,
the problem of overmanagement and centralization that
yeah,
kind of strips the uniqueness and the individuality out of the education process. When you're talking about like the whole word or the new
mm,
math teachings,
yeah,
this is a top down. This is who somebody on a committee decided that this is how to teach children. And now everybody underneath of them must implement exactly the same thing,
yeah,
which robs people of the opportunity to experiment, as you say.
Hmm. Yeah. But there is, it's a bit worse than that. It's a lot worse than that because you can experiment. There are experiments going on in the public school system and in charter schools. Uh, but the problem is that for us to make progress, those who fail must disappear. It's like I like the metaphor I used that without failure, the system is blocked like a clogged drain. I mean, you hear all these stories in the States, in France and Sweden, that oh, this excellent teacher taught us this, and the school is really good and so. Yes, but why do the other schools not disappear?
Mm.
In a free system, they would go bankrupt. They would lose all their students, and they would within a month or two they would be gone. Um, so the and that I have a picture there which I'm pretty pleased with on quality, which is when we think of schools, people say, "Oh, we must improve the quality of the schools and better education and so on." But there is no, we cannot tell in isolation what is good and what is bad. You can only do that by comparing something with something else. And if you have a government curriculum, there is only one way of teaching. And so, and also it takes about 10 to 20 years to prepare national school reform. And it takes, well, 10 to 20 years to evaluate it if you want to do it properly. You have to wait until at least one age cohort has gone through the system if you want to see the whole result. And most national school reforms make the system worse, fail. So you can either, and you compare that with the fact that children are living beings. So you could either have failure in the national school system, or you put your little children in um, the liquid nitrogen and store them there for 3,000 years until the government has improved the national school system. Uh, I find that very fascinating because we must improve for the children. And as soon as you do that, you go over to, they are no longer living children. They're abstract. It's something abstract
Mhm.
for the children. Yeah, but what about the kids today?
Mhm.
Are they going to go through an absolutely horrible school experience and learn nothing and then, well, start a proper education once they're 18 or 20, once they've left the system?
Mhm.
That's the, we really forget that it's children. Every every participant in the school system is a human being, and we tend to talk about it as if it's just a thing, sort of the
Mhm.
school system.
Yes.
Like,
I guess I've had an evolving perspective on this that's still evolving. And
hmm,
I my own experiences with the public school system in the US, there is a lot of variation in quality of schools and
yeah,
experience of kids that go to schools. I went to a very poor school district when I was a kid. I lived in a poor
hmm,
area. And it felt like a prison by the time you got to middle school and high school. It was run
hmm,
with a lot of animosity from administration and teachers towards the students. A lot of
hmm,
violence in the school. There was a lot of gang violence and
hmm,
fights all the time. Just very
hmm,
horrible stuff. And at one point I worked in the administrator's office as a credit for like a
hmm,
class credit. And I would hear the vice principal counseling kids to drop out all the time, just counseling the more violent boys. Maybe you should just go ahead and get your GED and get on out of here. So they didn't talk to us about college prep. We
no,
didn't do SATs. We didn't do anything. It was just basically managing the violence of this poor area.
hmm,
And I was in the gifted program, which was something kind of cool and interesting when I was younger because we got pulled out of these really boring classes
hmm,
and given more interesting things to do. But then by the time I got to high school, it was just more work. It wasn't anything more interesting. It was just instead of one book report this semester, you have three. So
Mm.
that was kind of the total of it. It was it was a really difficult, distressing experience for me growing up in school. It was really
Mm.
horrible. I dreaded it all the time. I used to fake sick all the time to try to stay home.
Yeah.
And then when I was raising my kids, my girls went through the public school system. And I can remember being sort of marveling at different aspects of it at different times. Like they went to a very poor school at one point, but it was a very
Mm.
small school. And there was a
Mm.
lot of connection between the teachers and the kids and the families that went there.
Yeah.
And it felt like a good place. There was actual connection and caring, despite the
Mm.
fact that it was in a low socioeconomic strata. Then they went to a more wealthy school district, and
Mm.
there were more fathers involved, and there were more enrichment activities to be done. But it felt like they were very proud of their per capita funding that they could provide to students. And I didn't really see an improvement in
No.
connection. And actually, I found a decrease in the quality of the connection between the teachers and the students, more of a focus on metrics. And
Yeah.
and then I think something really broke around the COVID era. My girls
Mm.
were out of school, and I had already pulled my sons out. So a
Mm.
separate story altogether. But something really broke for a lot of people
Yeah.
where they saw their kids get assigned computers and go home and sit on the computer for 5 hours a day while the teacher speaks to you through Zoom or some program. And all of the all of the
Mm.
enrichment and all of the positive interaction that might have occurred between the students and the other students or the teachers was
Mm.
replaced by a screen. And I
Yeah.
think we've seen, and I could go on, I could give more details and more data points in my story, but um, I think we've seen a massive pullout from the school system in the US since then.
Mm.
There's a, I don't know what the figures are. Maybe you know some of this, some of the
No,
data on
not
this.
no, I haven't looked into that, but
Well, there's a
I
there's
would.
a the surge in homeschooling since
Yeah.
then. I think part of it was parents just real it was such a shock. What do you mean you're going to send my kids home and school is closed? We've come to rely on this system where our kids are in
Yeah.
school
I
for
mean, you have
these
a
hours.
job. You have a
Right.
job to you go to. You can't leave your 12-year-old or 10-year-old at home all day.
That's right. Yeah. And so I
Uh,
think people have come to rely on that, but with the lockdowns,
mm.
they both provided this massive stark decrease in the quality of what the children were experiencing, but also for a lot of parents, they realized, oh, this is actually doable. We can rearrange our lives so that our kids
Yeah.
are not in this program. And there has been a surge in people homeschooling since then. I don't know if it's enough to really provide a competitive
Mm.
challenge to the American compulsory education system, but I wonder what that'll look like. I wonder if enough people are getting disenchanted
Well,
that we'll see a change.
I would recommend either homeschool or go get together with parents and start an illegal private school. Take no
Mm.
money except no government inspections, and that's what you have to do. Here in Sweden, we have well, uh, they didn't close the schools. I would say there's a Swedish approach to the pandemic, where we left everything open. I would say that our Swedish politicians were too incompetent to organize a lockdown, so that's why there wasn't one. But they closed the high schools, but not the other schools up
Mm.
to year 9. They were, and I worked on a school at a school at that time, which was um, strange, but it was people went around with masks and stuff like that. But we never had that lockdown that
Mhm.
you had in the States, which was a very good thing for us. But
Why close just the high schools? What was the logic behind that? That does sound like a strange, when you say that's too
very strange.
incompetent, I don't see the logic.
No, I think it's like maybe they can study on their own somehow.
Mm.
It's was too much of a disruption. The thing is that homeschooling is illegal in Sweden
Oh, it
because,
is. It
oh
is.
yeah,
Wow.
it's it's and in Germany, you know when they introduced it in Germany,
Uh,
1938,
okay. Oh, wow.
signed by Der Führer und Reichskanzler Adolf Hitler.
Made it
He
illegal to homeschool.
yeah, because you wanted to ensure indoctrination in the government schools.
Hmm.
And to this day, they have the same law in Germany. In Sweden, if you are, if you don't, if the children don't go to school and the parents say we can't make them, they're staying at home or whatever, doing whatever. Basically, nothing happens.
Hmm.
However, if you homeschool your children, then you pay a fine of $10,000 per year to the municipality for,
Wow.
and and someone I know did this, and they hired a tutor for Spanish who came for 2 or 3 hours a week. And my friend said to the social worker that he was really pleased with it because he actually learned Spanish instead of having 4 hours of Spanish per week in a government school with his friend without learning Spanish.
Hmm. Hmm.
And this was deeply unfair. There was you go to school to get to be with people you don't like, is what
Hmm.
the social worker said.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
and I think it's that's something I write in the book is that school has become a tribal ritual. That we go to school to go to school, and if you haven't gone to school, the knowledge you have is tainted somehow. It's not good enough.
Hmm.
And so then you have George Washington and Benjamin Franklin, who left school at 12, and Thomas Alva Edison spent 3 months in school, and then his mother taught him. And then when he was 12, he left on the railroad and did a newsletter from the Civil War and made lots of money apparently by being on the train and having a little printing press and producing his own news that he sold. And Abraham Lincoln, who never went to school,
Hmm.
who learned, he taught himself to be a lawyer from at home as well, sort of on the whilst
Yeah.
working.
Well, that's really interesting about it being a tribal ritual, and it is
Yeah.
sort of a seal of approval for
Yeah.
society. And I've thought about this at the higher levels as well. Like how you write in here that, and I don't want to misquote it, but the number of professionals, and I think you were speaking to the US, that have to
Mm.
have government
Yeah,
license in
that's
order to
yeah,
work has increased by what, fivefold since
yeah,
some not
50s,
too
I think.
distant point. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
And
that's another way that credentialism sort of stands in. Like
it's
you
like
can
it's
learn
like
a lot of fields without going
yeah.
through this particular regimen. You can there's a lot of value in autodidacticism, and even the people who
Mm.
go into formal study get
Yeah.
various amounts out of it depending on how much
Mm.
interest they have in it. So the little letters after the name don't
Mm.
necessarily stand for very much, except this is you attended this tribal ritual.
Yeah. I think I mean one thing that should be done is that government should not be cognizant of education degrees, no certification, and 4 year degree, engineering or whatever, or even medicine.
Mm.
It's something I read from this book by Telles and Brinksey, I think they called Lindsay and and Telles, that I didn't know this, that it's not the government that certifies doctors, medical doctors in the States.
Mm.
Well, it is formally. You get to go from, there's a state medical board. But according to that, you can then go to, you can practice, be a pediatric doctor for 25 years and then decide to do brain surgery from one day to the next.
Mm.
Nothing stops you,
Mm.
except that you have to have insurance and otherwise you will lose everything you own. And to get insurance, you have to go in front of private boards that certify, that verifies your skill level.
Mhm. Mhm.
So the actual certification of doctors is done by the private sector. And I think that you have all these accreditation schemes you have, that should be abolished. And I mean, what government should do is antitrust legislation so that see to that universities compete and do not collaborate.
Mhm.
What you said about these certifications like hairdresser and so on, it's like it's also the practitioners. It's like medieval guilds.
Mhm.
Everyone wants to protect your own profession, and if you do that, you prevent competition.
Yeah, that's a great example with hairdressers because I think that's one of those. When you start talking about psychology or you start talking about medicine, people really want to protect the guilds. They feel like the free market isn't going to provide
Mm,
enough checks and balances to ensure that people aren't
mm.
don't end up with charlatans who can really hurt them.
But
And
but
so there's that's I would love to hear your responses to that because I have my own responses and I want to hear it from you how you feel about that. But when you use the example of a hairdresser, I think
mm.
that that is something that can kind of make
Well,
people
you
go,
can you
okay,
can
I can see
you
that. So what's the
you
harm?
come you come home and you scream at the mirror. Oh no!
Yeah.
I mean
Yeah.
that's the worst that can happen.
Right. Right.
But the thing is that well, uh, as any animal, we are designed to be afraid of the unknown. That's the first thing. So we want to, as soon as something is certified, it feels more certain. You have a guardrail. You have something to cling on to, like a certification. Some expert has looked into this, so that we feel safer that way. If if there were no certifications whatsoever of medical doctors, dentists, and so on and so forth, then you wouldn't know from the outset who to go to. So there would be private association, like the American Medical Association, but without monopoly power, that would certify the Hippocratic oath. It's one of those confidence generating devices. It was between 1200 and 1500 city states in Greece. No regulation whatsoever of medical profession. So how does a patient know who to trust? So the Hippocratic oath is one of them. If you are admitted by peers, so you get chains of trust that way. So you have to in a free system, in an unregulated system, you get more trust because the whole system has to work on trust. That's all you have. You have it's like banking. If we had free banking, no government guarantees whatsoever, no Fed and so on, banks would be extremely boring. They used to be. It's like if you've seen Mary Poppins, that kind of inflation would be 0.1% per year or something like that,
Mhm.
and it would be yeah. So they would have to exude trust every step of the way. And if you go to a doctor that is not guaranteed by the government, you have to look into it.
Mhm.
Is he a member of this and that association? Has he been certified and so on and so forth? And then I go to him and I trust him.
Mhm.
That's the and bad doctors, bad associations would lose the trust of the public, and bad doctors would go bankrupt.
Mhm.
That's
Well, and I think people often and I'm kind of maybe I'm projecting a little too much. Maybe I should come back and just say me. I think that I would have at one point thought that what's to stop those associations from having ill intent? What's to stop sort of organized
mm,
crime and guilds to promote their own regardless of, merit and yet We look at
Yeah.
the amount of trust people have in governments right now, the amount
Mm,
of trust that governments have lost, but we're still
mm,
allowing their seal of approval to be the stand-in for trust. We're still allowing them to be the utmost expert on who we can
mm,
trust and what we can do. And so I kind of wonder, with all of the distrust of government. So for example, you mentioned that the medical board, maybe there's a state seal or a state
yeah.
exam that you have to pass, but they're regulated by private institutions within
Yeah.
that. That's who's supplying the information to the state that they need to have. That's whose tests and exams are being created by.
Mm,
With counseling, because that's what my experience has been in a
mm,
professional counseling program. I found that these programs and what they can teach and what they must teach, and some of the material that people are
mm,
most that finding most controversial right now, that seems to be
mm,
the in resulting in a rapid decline of trust in the counseling profession. We're talking about
mm,
multicultural stuff, gender stuff, these kinds of things
mm.
that are going on. These are, excuse me, are, excuse me, instituted and regulated by private organizations like CACREP, which is the Council
Mm,
for Accreditation of Counseling and Related
mm,
Programs, educational programs. So there's a private institution that is controlling the education of professional
yeah.
counselors in the US. And people are really worried about this. And yet that's the only recourse. If you want to become a counselor, you
Mm.
still have to go through one of these programs. Excuse me, I'm gonna cough.
Yeah, but is that because of government sanction?
Well, I don't know if it's government sanctioned. That's a good question.
Because I know that I'm talking to you from Sweden, but I've seen a bit of Milton Friedman and I've read quite a bit about it. And in the States, the American Medical Association, they have acquired a monopoly on certifying doctors. And both for doctors and veterinarians, what they've done is they managed first they limited the number of training of places at university where you could study to become a doctor, and that apparently has been stopped. Now instead they have limited the number of what do you call it? After your training, you need to have 1 or 2 years residency. So there are doctors that in the States that go through they are certified as a doctor, but they just need the residency. So they retrain to become a nurse instead because they can't become a doctor.
Mm.
And that is to keep salaries up for doctors. Restrict the number of places as far as possible
Mhm.
is what they've been doing.
Mhm.
And so I assume that your professional association also have government sanction
Yeah.
that prevents any competitor from we could you the non woke
Mhm.
what call it counselor association is has not been created. I assume that there would be 10-20% of you would jump ship immediately if you
Mhm.
could.
Yes, and it's really interesting how even among the people who distrust this current scheme for educating and licensing counselors, even among these people, there is a wariness of anybody who goes outside of that system to try to work outside of that system.
Mm,
You know, the word counselor is protected by the guild.
mm,
It is a term of art right now that can
yeah,
only be used if you have gone through this process. So you
yeah,
can't call yourself any kind of counselor unless you have
no,
the government seal of approval and you've got the guild and the institution backing you.
yeah,
So you have to call yourself something else. And so if you want to
mm,
practice any kind of related
mm,
social help, you have
mm,
to call yourself a coach or a consultant or something like that.
yeah,
And then there are certain
uh,
protected things that you have to stay away from. You have to walk these lines. You may not
mm.
perform any kind
And
of
if you're
diagnosis or any kind of treatment according to their jargon and their literature. And so I do this. I work as a coach, and I have to call
Yeah.
myself this word, which is kind of a silly word. Doesn't feel like
Mm.
it's reflective of my work. And
Yeah.
I don't care at all for diagnosis. I think that that whole system is really
Mm.
concerning and rife with ethical uh, concerns for me.
Yeah.
But I still, professionally, even for the people who will be the first to condemn what the current system is doing,
Mm.
I don't, there's a skepticism of the value of someone like me in this kind of
Mm.
work because there's an affiliation and a loyalty to that
Well,
credentialing process, to the expertise behind that.
if you if you get successful, if several of you become successful, then there will be intense lobbying on politicians to ban whatever you're doing or ban some certain aspect of what you're doing, which to torpedo the whole your
Mhm.
whole line of business essentially. They
That's
will
right.
pick some little thing that you can't do, which is central to what you're doing, and because for safety reasons, of course, it
Hmm.
must be for the patients, so we
Hmm.
are certain that. So it's like yeah,
Well, I
it's
guess
like
I
in the
wonder,
teaching.
you talk about the drive for conformity and where that
Yeah,
comes from, and perhaps we could get into that a little bit.
yeah.
You refer quite a lot to the Great Society and to
Mm,
the what a complex adaptive systems
yeah.
in here, and I would love to hear you lay a little bit of that out for people because I again I have been thinking and talking about how centralization and
Mm,
centralized management of
yeah.
complex systems seems to be playing a massive role in a lot of the societal breakdown that we're
Yeah.
seeing. But I love the way that you articulate this. So if you could kind of go into that a little bit.
Well, debate. I can. This is my new book, which talks about that. It is really my original book where I started everything. But it's you could say that. Well, first of all, we have the brains of a human gatherer. Our ancestors lived for 2 million years in as hunter-gatherers with bands of 25 people, clans of 150, and whole tribes, whole countries of about 500. And the clan is important in this. It's the clan is. Have you heard of Dunbar's number?
Hmm.
Yeah. So Dunbar's number is about 100 to 100. That's 150. That's the number of people you can have a high quality relation to. You can keep tabs on them. You know what they did for you, what you owe them, and you can where they are in socially. Um, and then we have the tribe of 500. We're in also in the hunter-gatherers people you might not know very well. If it's a big tribe, it might be 1,500 people, and you know few of them, but you know your clan. Um, the we have human societies are kind of, for these reasons we can coordinate human societies in essentially three ways. You can do it intuitively, like in the clan, you have relations with people, and a company up to 150 can be run without a management structure. And then we have what comes next to us is bureaucratic rules. We make up rules we have make a hierarchy, and you do this and I do that, and we come to an agreement and so on and so forth. And that we have to do that when we form a company that is larger than 150, or even if it's less than 150, but we are not a cohesive culture. I mean, cohesive like um, Mennonites and other religious societies. But then we have the Great Society, and that's not Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Society, it's Adam Smith's Great Society, which is a complex adaptive system where David Hume put up three rules that are essential to it. Is that your possessions are protected, that you can you can buy and sell what you own, and that you have to uh, promises, contracts have to be respected, and also that you have to compensate others for damage you do to them. And this does not compute to the human brain. It's like an anthill. We are small ants. And an anthill is a complex adaptive system as well. Ants are free to do whatever they want. They walk around and do different ant things, and the result is an anthill. And if if we respect David Hume's three laws, then we get what Friedrich Hayek called an extended order. Everyone is connected to everyone else, but we just deal with what we know ourselves, and we get a prosperous society with phenomenal growth and so on. The problem is then that there are various instincts that we have that put gravel in the machinery for this. And one of them is you say, social conformity is one of them. Uh, that is these hunter-gatherer bands that we lived in, tribes. They were whole countries, and they were at war with each other. Not constantly, but often. Um, some estimates say that if there's about 100 million people died during the 20th century in war. If the world had been as violent as for hunter-gatherers, that number would have been 2 billion instead.
Wow. Wow.
So it's about 30 to 100 times as violent as the United States or Europe is today, roughly. And that means that they were all coalition builders. You had to stand with the next guy, but you had also see to that anyone who deviated from the norms of the group had to be punished, not so much for what they do, but for as a warning to the others, so that others do not defect either. So we have a brain that is scanning all the time for lack of social conformity. And I think as a woman, you're particularly subject to that in a school environment like a high school is can be absolutely horrible for in that sense. Fashion is an example also of that your group has a certain fashion and others have different fashions, and you have outsiders and insiders.
Mhm.
And school has become a tribal ritual. It's like an initiation rite for hunter-gatherers, where they don't hang you in your skin and torture you for several days, or they could mistreat people for several years in camps among hunter-gatherers. If you've gone through that ordeal, you are a trusted member of society. You can be trusted to stand by your brothers and sisters in the fight. If you shirk your responsibility, if you don't go to school, for example, you're uh, you're essentially a traitor to society. You can't be trusted. And
Mhm.
those are the psychological mechanisms that we have, unfortunately have put was well, what do you call it? Put in place for schools. Once schools became the norm, they became a tribal ritual, which I find it fascinating. I don't know if you saw from the book that compulsory education in schools roughly arrives several decades after everyone voluntarily goes to school. It's only then that you have
Mhm.
this ritual has been introduced and anchored. Then
Mhm.
you can force people as well to do what they would do anyway.
Mhm. So it's interesting because that's like you're witnessing or able to describe a thing, you think it's good, so you tighten control over it and
Yeah,
make it the
com
the norm,
yeah,
compulsory. Mhm.
yeah.
So how would you, as you're describing that, the human nature, the nature of the Great Society being
mm,
this complex system that
mm,
is made up of small motions of individuals interacting
yeah,
within their smaller groups,
mm,
and the way that those groups then interact and form sort of like an anthill, like this
yeah,
complex system. There's that aspect of human nature, and then there's that control conformity aspect that
mm,
says basically this is let me see if this resonates. So basically it says this is good and I see what's good about it. Now I don't trust everybody else to keep doing it, so we must go out and control and use
mm,
my ideas in order to enforce that this remains. It's kind of like a web of it. At its core, there's a lack of trust that systems will
yeah,
continue to work. So it's a lack of trust, and it's a devaluation of the capacity of other people to keep moving in their little ant motions. And then when
yes.
you describe the
I
way that
think
if
it's
go
I
ahead.
think the way it works is that uh, I don't know if I have these had these thoughts before, but the way it works is that everyone does something voluntarily or together. Then it becomes a norm, and then you become suspicious of others. It's not until it has become the norm and everyone does it voluntarily, essentially, except for a few outcasts that you don't care about. Then then you apply. Then this mistrust comes from. In Sweden, it's absolutely horrible. You have this. There are certain people who, well, I think in the States as well, that can't take care of their children and
Mhm, mhm.
so on and so forth. So we have to force them to do that. So I think it's misplaced in a terrible way because people are already doing it voluntarily, and then this mistrust of any deviant. I think that's the generating principle, really. The mistrust
Mhm.
of deviant people, suspicion that might be deviant people that turn turn you into suspicion to mistrust of others. That's my something I came up with now. So I don't. It's not
Mhm.
my fully formulated theory, but maybe. But it's. I think it's because that's the order of things.
Mhm.
As long as say you go back 150 years when 2-3% went to what's called high school or something, and everyone else learn how to read and write, but not necessarily in school. And maybe a third or a quarter in Sweden, a third or a 40% went to school in Sweden. Others learned by their mother and so on, and then
Mhm.
they started working. There was no mistrust, and you can't even find in the literature how people learned how to read and write Swedish. For example, if you go back to the 17th century in Sweden, you had these cathedral schools for an elite, but they start when they're 8, 9 or something like that.
Mhm.
There's no mention, no one knows, no one has recorded how they learned to read and write Swedish. Apparently, that was so obvious that no one bothered to mention it. It's
Interesting. Well, I
so
wonder if that tendency to seek perfection, to try to perfect a
yeah,
system isn't, do you believe that that's inevitable? And I'll ask because I can see how that might operate from the very small scale up to the large. Like on the very smallest scale, I picture like primates picking
mm,
lice off of one another. You know, when
yeah,
you're combing through, looking for what stands out, take it out.
yeah.
Combing through, looking, when you're sifting through beans to
Mm.
cook, you're sifting through, you're picking out. And so I feel
Mm.
like on what you're
It's
describing
a
is the same thing. Yeah, purity.
purity cycle sort of which
Mhm.
there is also in schools there is the regulation cycle which is because every time the school quality goes down gradually and you're not happy with that, so they try to regulate harder, make everything more strict and longer teacher education. There used to be here in Sweden, it was one semester teacher training after you had your studies. Then it became 1 year, and now it's 1.5 years. At the same time, the quality of the teacher has gone down. They are the absolutely worst to go to college, for example.
Mm.
Um, so every time there is a failure, you regulate harder. I don't
Mhm.
know if that answers your question, really, but I think that's a mechanism in the school system, which is very unfortunate.
Well, it does seem that way, that the interventions create cascades of unforeseen problems
Yeah,
for which the solution is more intervention.
yeah.
And
Well, I
and
have
you
this
end
in
up with
my
this giant mess.
well, I have this in my other book that if you have a complex adaptive system, every time you do things, a deliberate attempt to shape it, you will get, like rent control is a brilliant
Mhm.
example. You get second, third, fourth order effects, and some of those will be problematic.
Mhm.
So you start with one problem, now you get two problem, and the hunter-gatherer brain with its sees this as a bureaucratic problem, then applies more regulations. So you go from 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, and 10, 20, 1024 problems that
Mhm.
urgently need solving every time you do something, because it's like eddies in a stream. You put it in the stone, everything
Mhm.
starts spiraling.
Well, and the
That's
question is then, if we are in a stream with many eddies and
mm,
many downstream problems from original
mm.
interventions or early centralized interventions, is it possible for people just to see that and step back and allow it just to heal itself, release some intervention, or are people so compelled to
Mm.
continue to intervene and tighten control in response to the problems that they're seeing, that there's not any way to see this getting better?
Well, that's something I talk about in this other book, and historically speaking, the answer is very tragic. You need
Mhm.
a gigantic war, occupation, starvation, and everything smashed to pieces. That's
Basically
if
resetting the stage.
yeah, well, you have um, if you look at Europe, the history of Europe of the Romans, um, they unified the Mediterranean, and when they did that 100 BC, they killed science essentially.
Mm.
But but there was laissez-faire capitalism essentially until 190 AD, when there were civil wars. And then a century later, the Roman Empire was reconstituted really on the Constantine. And but it was a Soviet-style centralized system, highly bureaucratic, which strangled everything. And then came the barbarians, but they took over the old system, the Franks and the Visigoths and everything like that. So it was only when were the Arabs in the south, there were Vikings in the north, and there were Hungarians who ravaged the Frankish Empire. And then they started building castles, fortified positions. And then the whole of France and Britain descended into small fiefdoms. And you got a resurgence. And that smashed the Roman tax system.
Mhm.
And Europe took off, essentially. That's there is have you heard Milton Friedman and I can't remember the other guy's name. They wrote a paper called Roofs or Ceilings
Mm.
about housing. It's from
Oh.
1946. It's very fascinating. They looked at this after the war. There was a severe housing shortage in San Francisco due to they had rent regulations during the war and so on. And they compared this to 1906 after the fire. So I read this in Thomas Sowell, but I read the paper as well. So there was the gigantic earthquake, the big one, and a fire that burnt down half the city, roughly. And some left, but there was essentially, if you compare to the population, 40% of the houses were gone.
Mm.
6 weeks later, the first issue of a paper comes out. there's no mention of housing shortage. You could tear down half of New York City,
mm,
and if you have no rent regulations, nothing, just freedom of contract, 6 weeks later, there is no shortage of housing.
mm, mm,
People make do, they rent out rooms and so on and so forth. Everyone adjusts to everyone else.
mm.
But as soon as you said, as soon as you try to um, regulate everything, then it goes pear shape essentially. Yeah. And that's what's
That's
happening. Yeah.
that's so interesting. And I guess I can see echoes of this in many, many different places
Mm.
in our you called it a cohesive culture, and we have a very not cohesive culture. We have a very heterogeneous
You
culture.
have sort of several cohesive cultures, which
Uh,
don't you? Oh, you
well,
have the left with.
I don't know. I don't know if I think that there are like pseudo cultures. I think that there are
Yeah.
labels and sort of
Mm.
loose federations and connections of people based on
Yeah.
ideologies, and yet I'm not sure it's not a stand-in for this original description of like the hunter-gatherer society where people really know one another.
No. Well, I
And
mean,
so you have so many layers of government and social control that stand
mm,
in for trust. And
yeah.
I think about just you mentioned the that in every people, every society, they're going to be parents who can't care for their children. There are going to be
Yeah.
failures within that. There are going to
Yeah.
be horrible stories of
Mm.
neglect or abuse. Things like this are
Yeah.
going to happen. And yet, when I think of something like Child Protective Services, you hear
Mm.
these stories about how they might get involved because there's some concern or some
Mm.
report. But once you start looking at any family, you're going to see dysfunction. And it just
Yeah.
depends on what is your need for perfection and control, and what is the amount of
Mm.
control you have over this family system. It's a
Mm.
family's worst nightmare to have Child Protective Services called to scrutinize them, because every single family is going to have
Yeah. Well,
dysfunctional
we're
elements.
humans. We
Yeah,
are not robots.
yeah, yeah.
So it's no. I think his name's Olaski, or wrote the Tragedy of American Compassion. I just read that book. He said
Mm,
that Benjamin Franklin, he visited England in 1766, and he was horrified by social misery.
mm,
But Britain um, had government programs for beggars and so on. The United States had nothing like that. So there were problems in Britain. There were no problems in the United States because there was tough love all the way.
mm,
Um, and in the 19th century, they tried handing out benefits and help people. But in 19th century, there was some movement away from that. And for example, there was some charity that they had a pile of wood, and if you wanted help, because you had to prove that you could chop wood for 2 hours before.
mm,
Then, if you did that, then you could
mm,
be trusted. And I think Jonathan Haidt said, I just reread his what's it called, The Righteous Mind,
mhm,
and I don't know if he is a bit somewhat left wing. I think he's trying to detach himself. You can see that almost, but
mhm,
essentially he says that we are not designed to be unsupervised. I mean, we like freedom, but we can't, we need someone watching us because
mm,
we are not, we don't behave well when we can have no responsibility, essentially.
mm,
Then things go bad for us. There are
mm.
very few people who can sort of be virtuous in a vacuum.
Well, who's the supervisor?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you have no welfare state
Mhm,
and no child protective services, and it's the neighbors who do
mhm,
that, and
mhm,
they look at you, they see you, and because they have to live with the consequences of you not taking care of your children. So
Mhm.
the church, the local organization, will intervene, and you yourself will. You want to be member of the community as well. What will the neighbors say is extremely powerful, and that's something I talk about on education as well. That you don't want to be. What if you don't care about your children? Well, do you
Mhm.
want to be known as the parent in the on the block that doesn't care about your children, despised by everyone else?
Mhm.
That's um, that's a very powerful motivator as well.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's
Well,
not.
and I can see also how our increased technological connectivity allows us to decrease the local connectivity.
Yeah.
So you can be in your house working and
Mm,
living and interacting with your family and all kinds of things and
mm.
almost never even see or know the people in
I
your
mean,
immediate neighborhood.
I was at the university, and early 90, 94, 90, I dreamt that like the interaction we are having now, that would be the future. Sort of, you could find communities and meet people that you get along with, that have a common interest with. But
Mhm.
I didn't realize that much of society would go pear shape as well. But maybe social media is, um, I don't know. I read something very interesting at the Marginal Revolution. Tyler Cowen has a few days ago. Someone wrote in and said that I don't know if you see this, that the from 2013 to 2020, something like that, you get enormous anxiety, especially among girls, and
Mhm.
problems with social media. And his impression was that the current generation of youngsters, they work this out. They've matured with the technology,
Mhm.
realized this is not good. We have to and know how to handle it. The first
Mhm.
generation that got their hands on it was didn't know
Mhm.
how to behave,
Mhm.
and we are gradually maturing and adapting to. I hope that's true, but I don't know.
I hope so too. And
Mm.
but how do you think that we can unwind this? I know you said this could be if we all just decided to stop centralizing control so much and having governments regulate
Mm.
education the way that they are, this system could change pretty quickly. You could see it changing in just a couple of
Yeah,
years, very, very
yeah. I think
completely. But do you
if
think that's possible?
um, I have I don't have a feel for how it is in the States, but I think, and unfortunately, the Swedes are extremely timid and social conformist, as much more than Americans are. But the only hope, it's politically impossible. I mean, and this is something I want to stress, uh, make explicit that I am against the existence of government school, but I'm also against the existence of charter schools. That's
Mm.
prime example of crony capitalism. It's well, it's they get money from the government, not the parents. They
Hmm.
have to follow government curricula. They are government expected. They have government trained teachers and so on and so
Hmm.
forth.
Hmm.
So it's
It's just
that
public school with a different name.
yes, unfortunately. Um, but I think the only hope is massive homeschooling and start illegal underground private schools and
Mhm.
pay for them. And I think that's uh, something I write about in the book. I learned just now that there's something called micro schools. I didn't know. I thought it was
Mm.
just schools because, as I write in the book, all you need to do to start a school is you need a teacher and a large room.
Mhm.
That's all you need. And if you then teach 25 children and you charge, I don't know, $400 a month or $300 a month or something like that,
Mhm.
you can make a living as a teacher out of for teaching 25 children.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And you have no guidance counselors, no nurses, nothing, no school board, nothing. Just
Mhm.
parents that hand you money once a month.
Mhm.
for their children. So it's because one of the immediate reaction when you say privatize schools is it's too expensive. People don't have enough money to do it. But it's private schools would cost maybe a third of what the public schools cost at the moment.
You had a good
Something
quote
like.
in here about that. I don't know if I'm going to be able to find it right now, but it was a good quote about uh, a Kenyan quote.
Yeah, it's the first page. First page,
Yeah,
page one.
okay. Okay. I have to find that. But saying basically something free is,
Yeah, it's
yeah, yeah, I want to
it's
find
the
it because I
first
think it
page.
was very good. I'm
It's literally page one.
literally page one before the introduction, even
No, on the introduction,
on the introduction. Okay, I'll find it.
on top of the
If you
page.
go to a market and are offered free fruit and vegetables, they will be rotten. If you want fresh fruit and vegetables, you will have to pay for them. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, that's
yeah,
I thought that was a good one. And it was
mm,
a poor Kenyan resident of the slums of Nairobi on why he pays for private school for his daughter.
yeah. It's
Yeah.
from James Tooley's book, The Beautiful Tree, which is a wonderful book
You
that I
you
can
you
read.
speak of that quite a bit in here, and I think
Yeah.
that's a whole nother story that it would be good to hear.
Mm,
But there's a couple of questions, I guess, that would be the a couple of the main sort of pushback, I guess, that you might get for this
yeah.
argument to privatize.
Mm,
One is what you just mentioned. Some people can't afford it. How would you
mm,
afford it? And another one is, what about work? What about parents that have to work? How could they homeschool? So you kind of hear both of those are this
yeah.
economic um, concern that we need the public school because it
Mm.
has we've grown to depend on it so much that how would poor kids get equal opportunity, and how would poor families be able to provide for their kids if we did away with government education?
Uh, well, first, if we got rid of government education, based on 19th century figures, United States would get something like 600,000 private competing schools, which would, on average, have 50 pupils, maybe something like that, for at least for primary education up to 11, 12 years of age, or 13 maybe. And then there would be high schools, um, and junior high schools and high schools. Um, so I'm not well versed in homeschooling because again it's illegal here. But as
Mhm.
I understand it, lots of parents parents get together and take turns teaching children, and that could be one way of
A
doing it. And
cooperative model, yeah.
yeah, but also you could start a hire a teacher
Mhm.
and a school, create a school and pay a teacher. You get together parents and pay the teacher. One thing I wanted to say also from which is from the book is that um, good. I mean, if you measure quality as learning how to of primary education, is learning how to read and write and do arithmetic and a bit of civics, a bit of history, and so on, which is that primary education is what's it socially acceptable, socially um, what people expect is socially expected of you to know as a citizen. That's
Mhm.
essentially primary education. And secondary education, which is um, junior high and high school, essentially in the States. That's if you had good primary education, something like 40% only 40% would continue to junior high. The rest would start go um, vocational training and start work at 13 or 12 or so, like people used to do. And there's nothing wrong with that. But and then the objection is, well, there are no jobs for 19-year-olds and for 13-year-olds. No, because the unions have banned such jobs because they don't want low wage competition. And but would you rather have someone who knows everything you're supposed to know from high school at age 12 in or someone who is 19 who for the past 8, 10 years has learned nothing except bad habits and negative attitudes in high
I,
school?
this is such a brilliant point, and this is actually something I'm open to the page in the introduction where you start talking about this and you say, um, why it is not child slavery to start working at 13 or 14. It will not be advocated that children begin work that young, but there's no reason to prevent people from doing so either. And we reference people like Benjamin Franklin, George Washington, Thomas Edison, and you say learning on the job is a perfectly acceptable alternative to going to school. And as the
Mm,
mother of two sons who are 14 and 12
yeah.
and are homeschooled, I
Mm,
agree with this so strongly. They're very
yeah.
capable people who
Yeah.
are very driven
Mm,
to be positively engaged, and they have a motivation to want to help and
mm,
work. And if someone says, yeah, if it's time to cut down a tree or
mm,
load things up or build a chicken coop or something like
yeah.
that, these guys want to do that. They want
Yeah.
to work. And
Mm,
that you could get into a conversation about minimum wage laws and
mm,
all of the problems that are preventing kids from being actively engaged. But it really seems like secondary schooling
mm,
is functioning as a holding camp in order
mm,
to prevent this. And you go into this as well in here. It is essentially a way to kind of keep things safe and keep kids off the street, keep kids from
yeah.
causing havoc and being chaotic in a society that's not prepared to support them in finding a
Mm,
meaningful and motivated engagement. So it's a holding tank, but what happens while
mm.
you're holding them is they're wasting time and they're actually missing out on opportunities to learn what they're good at.
I was at a school 5 years ago, 6 years ago, and the 12-year-old kids there, the boys,
Mhm.
they were 12-year-olds. They were watching snow scooter videos in class on the electronic, and all they dreamt about was they wanted to, until they were 18, and LKAB, the mine here, one world's largest underground mine,
Mm.
could employ them. They could start work. So
Oh,
they were
wow.
waiting 6 more years for doing
Mhm.
sod all, as they say in England.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
It's absolutely tragic, and they are. Well, I have one personal experience there because I didn't put my talk about myself there, but I mean, when I was 12, I we trained 9 times a week swimming.
Mhm.
3 times a week we got up at 6, walked to the swimming pool, trained for 1.5 hours, and then after school trained 2 hours every evening, 6 days a week, and then competed on Sundays. That's, and that's you're allowed to do, but you are not allowed to do strenuous tasks when
Mhm.
you're 15 even.
Mhm. Well,
What?
it's keeping you essentially useless
Yeah.
for a long part of your energetic life.
Hmm.
And I think it's very strange that we've chosen to do that. It's like in the name of preserving the freedom of children, we create uselessness. And you think
Hmm.
about this, the epidemic of normlessness and anomie, this kind of sense of purposelessness, the sense
Yeah.
of meaninglessness of your life. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, you've engineered a system where they are
I think
useless.
I don't know how it is in the States, but I think it's one of the origins, as I said, in Sweden at least, is the unions. They didn't want low wage competition.
Mhm.
The problem is that it's the working class that their children who are the most affected by this.
Mhm.
Because the upper classes, the intellectual elite, their children will do reasonably well in school and they are off to college and will not do poor manual labor like the plebs. But
Mhm.
so, but the unions have, yeah, their members don't understand that if they want their children to flourish, then they have to let them work. It's nothing wrong with that.
Mhm.
So, I mean, if you ask in Sweden now, if you ask the 12-year-old boys if they would rather start working, even for very low pay, or continue in school, I think that 60, 70% of the boys would leave because
Mhm.
it's like in the States that it's also extremely hostile environment for boys in school.
Mhm. Mhm.
Girls girls are proper and they do as the teachers say and so on and so forth, and they they do reasonably well. Or but I don't think well the girls don't learn anything else, anything or much useful either, but they get good grades at least because they are
This,
polite and
something you said in here about teachers, you cited a paper or a book, or I'm not sure if it was a study, but you talk about how teachers tend to dislike creative kids. They tend
yeah.
to actually dislike the
This
traits
is
that are
I've been
associated with creativity.
yeah. Eric Westby is the I was in contact when he sent me the paper if I remember correctly.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um,
Well, that
no,
resonates
they
for me and especially when you say girls do well. I think that that's the case on a large to a large degree, but I was in trouble all the time in school. I had
yeah
a terrible time. It was I was on academic probation from late elementary school all the way through the end of high school. I would
yeah
be it just so much about the system didn't make sense to me, and I would
no
argue with it or refuse to do it. And I would always be brought in to talk about my potential and how I wasn't meeting my potential. And it got so bad that by the time I was in high school, I was really rejecting so much of this very authoritarian. I told you it felt like we were
mm,
in prison. We actually had
yeah
police officers and metal detectors at the doors. And there was overt hostility. And again, it was a violent area. So and but I felt like the way that the school interacted with students was a huge part of the problem. And
mm,
my, um, just as now, my speaking up got me in a lot of trouble. Just as
yeah
it continues on to
no
present day,
it's
I get
social
myself in
conformity.
trouble. Yes. Yeah. And
I was
I was
I
never expelled, but I was suspended and I was put in on-campus suspension where
mm,
you're in a little room. And this happened over and over again to me.
when I was a PhD student in physics, we had I was responsible for the solid state physics course lab, and there were it's a long time ago. It's I've forgotten most things, but we had the engineering students, like think MIT, that studied at one and a half, twice the pace of everyone else. That came in, two people, you do this, I do that, and to get everything done because they had to go home and study for some other test. And then you had a physicist who came in there and they wanted to learn. So
Mhm.
they had a 4 hour lab and they would rather stay for 5 or 6 hours so they could experiment more. And then you had the teacher students that came in and they wrote with sort of feminine handwriting, very proper and so on and so forth. And invariably, um, they sat there for an hour or two and then they raised their hand and said, could you come and look to see that we connected everything correctly? No. But what if we've done something wrong? Well, it could be an explosion or something, I said. And that's exactly what want to follow the instructions. That's the
Mhm.
uh, and for those who haven't read the paper, so the teachers define the first primary trait for normal people normally say creative people have is make up the rules as they go along. Teachers put that out of 20 on 19th place. That's
Wow. Wow. Mm.
that's so following instructions is what teachers think is a sign of creativity,
Mm.
which is not exactly the way things work.
Wow. That's fascinating. I have so many other thoughts and questions for you, but I feel like I should offer us the chance to wrap up since we've been talking for a while. Is there
Yeah.
anything Is there anything that we haven't addressed that you think it would be really important to get into before we do that?
Maybe I should, if it hasn't been clear, do not, as a parent, do not respect schools other, unless that particular school has earned that particular respect. And don't be afraid to, you're a parent, you know more than most teachers do, like, unfortunately, these days. And give your children pen and paper and teach them how to write longhand and read books, I would say, is that's um, that's what I would recommend. Or start a school. If you but longhand and reading books is what you should I think encourage.
I agree with that. I think
Mm,
that's really good advice. And more, when I first heard the idea of unschooling, it seemed like a
mm,
radical, weird hippie thing to do. And
yeah,
now it's pretty much what we do. And
yeah.
I don't know what you think of that trend, but I have the farther I get from the institutional process of
Mm.
schooling, the more I wonder how I ever thought any of it was acceptable.
Because I still have. Oh, I've got rid of them now. For the first few years after I wrote the book, I still had phantom pains about this old system that we had in Sweden that I describe in the book,
Mhm,
which my mother went to, and which would have been absolutely brilliant for me,
mhm,
but not so brilliant. And one or two of my four children, but maybe two of them, I think, wouldn't have flourished in that system
mhm,
because it was hard and unforgiving. What I would say, if I say, may about unschooling, um, I might write something more about it. But I've been thinking of it. Is that one thing about maths and all the what you need school for is that they have this, as I said, no pain, no gain aspect to them.
mhm,
So I think I'm not sure I like the unschooling label because you need to practice like maths. You need
mhm,
to solve problem after problem after problem until it becomes second nature, and then you get a little building block and a Lego block and another Lego block, and then you can do more
mhm,
things. And it's like playing tennis. That tennis players practice backhand for half an hour and then forehand for half an hour to get the right movement. And it's the same with maths and grammar and stuff like that that you have to practice.
mhm,
Um, so you have to get your reward from a delayed gratification that you learn things.
mhm,
So um, and then there is the in contrast there is this thing that school makes you sit like a robot and lose your independent your faculty of independent thought and so
mhm.
on. So there's a
It's
as
just
long as
something in the
you
middle.
something in the middle, concentrate on the skills that you learn the skills, but not the sitting still and behaving properly. That's my
I agree with you. And when I think of
yeah.
unschooling, I know a lot of unschooling families who do it very differently. What I think of is just that you're not using a centralized curriculum. The
Mm,
parent is creating the curriculum that they think is
yeah,
important and and can
yeah.
teach their
That's a
children absent the sort of mm, conformist view of how this should be done. So like for my
mm,
kids, I'll have them work on math once or twice a week
mm,
when I tell them to. But they also have other things that they do. Like I want
yeah,
their cursive to be good. Their writing must be good. And so
mm,
they get the option to write a creative story themselves or copy from a book that they
yeah,
choose. But either way, they have
mm,
to practice their writing. And this
yeah.
is done uh, most days, but not every day.
Mm,
And it's not done for 8 hours. It's not done for 5 hours. It might be done for a couple of hours at most.
mm,
And there's lots of other time to do things that as long as they're actively engaged, it could be reading a
mm.
book, it could be building models, it could
Um,
be drawing or running outside or riding their bikes for 4 hours around the city. Whatever they're doing, as long
that
as
that's
it's productive, that's part of school for them, and because it's an unschooling philosophy. So that's
yeah,
kind of my take on it.
that's being engaged is I mean, the absolute opposite of what you get in the government school. That's
Mhm,
you try to do as little as possible often, and
mhm,
no, yeah, that's I admire as I haven't had the opportunity to do it. My kids went to school in France as well, so it wasn't.
mhm, mhm,
It was I had to speak perfect French too.
mhm,
We didn't think we didn't even think it was possible to homeschool in France. Didn't know that.
mhm,
I don't know if I would have done it, but it's so carefully hidden that you have the opportunity to do it if you wanted to. But
mhm.
it would have been too difficult for us anyway, for various reasons. But
Well, it's been a delight for us to be able to do it, and my kids are such happy kids. They're
mm,
just really good and happy and smart kids that I it's not perfect. There
no,
could be
but
there's
they're
things that they
kids.
would be
They're
stronger
humans.
at with better education in some ways, but they're
Yeah.
overall the proof is in the pudding, and they're happy and
Mm,
well-mannered and enjoy life, and I feel like they learn most of what they need to learn. And so,
yeah.
we'll keep on working at it. I tend to struggle with structure a bit. So we're always
Yeah.
pushing towards more structure and falling away from it. But um, I have learned so much from your book, and
Thank you.
I really appreciate this conversation. I really
Mm,
appreciate that you connected with me, and I hope a lot. I hope your ideas get a much wider audience
yeah.
than just this. I think that what you're pointing to is incredibly important, and it ripples out from
Mm,
education to many other areas of
mm.
society. Um, and I wonder, where can people find you if they want to read more of your writing or connect with you, or what's your
But
online presence like?
my book is on Amazon.
Okay.
The first book was published by a professional publisher, and this edition is self-published on Amazon, extended edition. And I have another book on Amazon as well called Evolution and Social Order, which is where it all began. The book on education is a spin-off, but this one came out 10 years afterwards,
Well, I
to
think
say.
I'd like to read that as well.
Mm.
So I'll have to go find a copy.
And I have a Substack called Perpendicular, Purpndicular, after the 1995 Deep Purple album, which called
Oh,
Perpendicular, which I
oh,
love. Um,
excellent.
no one's taken that, so I took that. I write in Swedish as well, on chronicles in the newspaper here in Sweden. And, but if you Google my name, you should find me. So
Well, thank you so much for speaking with me. It's been a pleasure to talk with you,
yeah,
and
likewise.
I look forward to reading more of your writing. And I'm impressed with this, and I hope lots of people will check this out.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.